I'm delighted today to be joined in this conversation with Jonathan Wong. Jonathan is the Chief of Innovation, Enterprise and Investment at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Now, you may have seen a little bit of Jonathan's background in our invitation, but Jonathan, prior to being at the United Nations, was also at the UK Department of International Development, where he was the inaugural head of innovation. I have to say, Jonathan, I do love your titles in some of your positions. In this role at DFID, Jonathan led several high-profile social innovation initiatives, including catalyzing the Global Innovation Fund. This is quite interesting for us. This was a partnership, a blended finance partnership as such between private and public capital across countries, including Australia. Jonathan has extensive experience and policy expertise in social innovation and entrepreneurship, technology and innovative financing and impact investing. And prior to this work was also involved in venture capital as well. Now, Jonathan's received several awards. I'm not going to go through all of those, but one that did grab my attention was the inaugural Schwab Foundation Award for Public Social Intrapreneurship. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us from Bangkok today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's get into this very interesting conversation because some of your work covers all of my favorite keywords and issues as well. I wanted to start with this idea of the social economy. And as we previously discussed, the Centre for Social Impact has launched a multi-year study this year where we're going to start examining Australia's social economy. I don't want to get all academic about this, about definitions and things, but I wanted to get your views on why we're seeing this shift in interest in using this term, the social economy. What do you think the value of using this term is as well? And what are you seeing in terms of a regional focus of this social economy?
Sure. Yeah, big question to start, which is always good. I think kind of in short, I'll kind of give a short and long answer. I think in short, I think there's certainly been this realization that there's a need for a new economic model. Now, if I go back like 100 years or so, there's no question the private sector, business, entrepreneurs, however we want to define that, have been a source of like economic dynamism, innovation, not just in the Asia Pacific region, but globally as well. We've seen how business has put money in people's pockets, allowed them to kind of support their families and their communities. So certainly there's kind of a very good economic story to tell around the role of kind of business, private sector, entrepreneurship, or whatever it may be. But I think undoubtedly, and there's very good data around this, probably not so good for the environment and society. We've seen CO2 emissions rise in step with the industrial revolutions. Income inequalities are at the greatest they've ever been. So I think certainly historically there's this sense that I work with governments, as you mentioned, on public policy in the Asia Pacific region. There's a sense that we need a model that, in short, kind of better balances people, planet, and profit. And I think kind of fast forwarding to kind of more recent times, I think COVID really made this need for new economy really striking. It turned into a story of the haves and the have-nots. The very poorest couldn't afford or have access to vaccines. We saw technology company share prices soaring during the pandemic, while the very poorest people, and here I live in Bangkok, so you can place me. I saw the street vendors who were selling food on the street and fruit disappearing one by one. And that for me is not an economy that works, and I think I'm not alone in thinking that. And I think certainly COVID, on top of what I said previously about the history of kind of economic development, if you like, revealed a fractured economy that's really in dire need of innovation, quite frankly. And I think that's why I think this term social economy, as opposed to just kind of mainstream economics, is really gaining traction, particularly in the Asia Pacific region.
Now, given the regional focus of your role at the UN, what are the important variations or nuances that you're seeing in terms of policy approaches of using this idea of the social economy?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have so I'm from the UK as well, as you know. So I've seen kind of this model in the developed world versus the developing world, and then there's some kind of quite striking differences. And again, I think it's too early to say whether they're right or wrong. And I think certainly that it's always a question of balance as well. So certainly, if I take the UK experience, it was very much that the social entrepreneurship, social innovation, social economy agenda, it was more of kind of a civil society movement looking to become more entrepreneurial. So, how can civil society organizations use kind of business models to kind of go beyond just kind of donations and actually generate revenues? So it was kind of more civil society led. Now, in other countries where I've been working, particularly in Asia, it's been more business led. So it's more businesses. How can we do good versus civil society? How can we become more entrepreneurial or more business minded? So that would be one kind of, again, difference. And I'm not saying either is right or wrong. I think the second thing we've seen is like the mainstreaming versus standalone social economy policies. So I had a very interesting conversation with colleagues at the European Commission who are very proud of the fact that they developed a social economy action plan for the European Union. And I said, that is amazing, right? Amazing. But I was saying, but the European Commission also has an economic, not a social economy, an economic plan. And this is what I mean by this question of mainstreaming. Do you have standalone policy? So where I am in Thailand, as another example, we have a Social Enterprise Act, purely standalone policy. Korea has the same thing. While in other countries, and I'll take examples such as in Indonesia, social entrepreneurship is integrated into their national development plan. In Vietnam, we worked with the government on their inclusive and sustainable private sector strategy. So again, we were incorporating these, if you like, social economy principles within mainstream economic policy. Similarly, just a few weeks ago in Sri Lanka, the Prime Minister launched the inclusive and sustainable business strategy for Sri Lanka. Again, mainstreaming. So that's another key difference. And again, these are kind of questions for Australia, I suppose. Do you mainstream into main economic policy, or do you stand alone? And of course, there are trade-offs around all of this. There are benefits. And just, very briefly on that point, having a standalone policy, if you like, kind of ensures and safeguards, if you like, the principles and the purity of what it means to be a social enterprise or work on social innovation. But I suppose the trade-off is you may not get the mainstreaming within the core economy. While if you mainstream, there is a bigger chance you're going to get kind of scale, if you like. But maybe some of the principles that underpin social innovation and social interest may be lost in that. So yeah, they would probably be the key differences. Just one more point on this as well around terminology. Now people always do get hung up on definitions, right? All the time. And we're seeing. I said to you previously, I'm kind of a pragmatic innovator, and I realize that's a bit of an oxymoron. But we see different terminologies used. So social economy, impact economy. We see social enterprises, we see social businesses, we see inclusive businesses, we see B Corps, all these different sorts of terminology. But for me, they all, in my opinion, and people will kind of challenge me on this as well, I see this all a part of this broader social economy movement. So I'll stop there, otherwise I will continue to go on this forever.
No, I think it's very insightful, and it's useful for the conversations that we're having at a national level, and for all of us to think through, right, how can we best mobilize these terms? Where does that then draw a line of who participates or not, and what are the policy responses and impact that might have too? So I think we've got a bit more work to do there. I wanted to come then to this other big term that we're throwing out there of social innovation as well. Now, you were recently at Davos. We'd love to hear all the gossip of what was happening there for those of us who weren't there. So, you were speaking on the topic of why does social innovation matter for business? So I wanted to ask you, why does it? What was the reception at Davos for these types of ideas? And perhaps more importantly, from what we understand of the conversations there, the reception in terms of will they be meaningfully implemented and the different policy approaches perhaps around this. So I'd love to hear what you heard around there.
So this is my so I have two hats. So I'm also a World Economic Forum Schwab Fellow as well. So I've been championing kind of the social entrepreneurship agenda with the Schwab Foundation, which is the sister organization to the World Economic Forum. And this was kind of a little attempt to infiltrate the mainstream, right? Because if you're talking mainstream business, WEF is undoubtedly the platform for that. Every single CEO from every top company in the world was at WEF. And I think we've been working with the Schwab Foundation on actually how do we build the social economy narrative within the main WEF platform. And this has been kind of a few years we've been working on this. Now this year, it was interesting because the reception was quite good. And that's, of course, it would. How could they say we could be wrong? If we're looking at aligning profit, people, and planet, how could they possibly disagree? But the one thing I would say is, the way we try to frame it was probably slightly different to how so I'm from a development background, having come from the Australia equivalent of DFAT and now working for the UN. I think the framing of the business case for why businesses should care about social innovation changed. So we no longer spoke about, I don't know, 2 billion people in the Asia Pacific region without access to the internet being a development challenge. We said it's actually a business opportunity. I said 2 billion people without access to clean water in the world, which is sadly a fact, is not a development challenge. It's also a business opportunity. So there's something about reframing the narrative of how we, if you like, pitch this idea to business. It's not as kind of, this is some sort of charitable handout we need from you to kind of solve the world's problems, but actually these are business opportunities. And the whole clean tech sector, again, another massive business opportunity with legislation and policy around the world and COP commitments going in that direction. So there's something around the framing of the conversation. Now, in terms of more concrete stuff, this was the first year, and I said we've been kind of building the narrative within WEF around this. There were some very interesting pledges and new initiatives that were raised. So one of the key initiatives raised was the Global Alliance for Social Entrepreneurship, which is made up of some of the biggest corporates in the world who have actually kind of committed to promoting social entrepreneurship. So organizations, so it's co-chaired by SAP and Microsoft, two huge organizations. And it's really interesting to see how corporates are thinking about social innovation and supporting social entrepreneurs. So they were in conversations with, say, SAP, they would say how they're looking to actually integrate social enterprises within their supply chain. So of their suppliers who apply, we talk about public procurement as a route for social enterprises to get revenues. Actually, corporates spend a lot of money too. So they were talking about corporate social procurement, which was really kind of something very tangible. I think the other thing to mention is something called the Rise Ahead Pledge, where corporates for the first time, and this was the first time it happened at Davos, are making kind of dollar pledges in the multi-million-dollar range, US, around promoting and supporting social enterprises. So yeah, I think it's been kind of I mean, there's still a long way to go. I think we're still a long way from kind of mainstreaming these principles within the corporate and if you like bigger business world. But certainly we're seeing a movement that way, and these more concrete pledges in terms of dollars and commitments are certainly kind of indicating to me, at least, that we're moving in the right direction on that agenda.
Well, that's heartening, at least for that direction. Can I be cheeky to say that? I wondered in those conversations, what was the perceived role for government policy or multilateral organizations like the UN? Where's that conversation at?
Yeah, no, so you mentioned I came from venture capital, and when I was kind of in the private sector, I was always very cynical of government, and I was like, just get out of the way, make it easy for us to run our business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then I went to work for the government, and I was like, actually, no, government policy can do very interesting things. So I have actually a more balanced view on this, having kind of worked across sectors. And this is, I know, a plea to everyone on this call, actually. I think it's very helpful for social entrepreneurs and social innovations to actually step out of comfort zones sometimes, and if you're very cynical of government, actually go work for the government. If you've been in the government working on social innovation, go work in the private sector and see how it works. Because it does kind of balance your understanding of the constraints and opportunities that these different organizations face. But in terms of government policy, and this was the reason I actually moved to the UN from DFID, was this opportunity to work with, I work with 62 governments in the Asia Pacific region. It's the largest region in the UN system. Because I think government policy, they set the rules of the game in many ways, and really can give both carrots and sticks, in many ways. So we've seen in, say, Cambodia, where one of the few countries who have mandated environmental reporting alongside financial reporting, for companies. You can actually mandate this stuff, and every company needs to produce financial statements at the end of the financial year. Not all of them do environmental. So again, a carrot example. while in terms of incentives here in Thailand, we have a Social Enterprise Act, and there is a royal decree that gives investors in social enterprises a 100% tax break. So if, for example, you're an investor looking at investing in a very nice hotel, boutique hotel in downtown Bangkok, versus a social entrepreneur who's providing low-cost housing solutions to the very poorest people living in urban slums, it may make you have a think about, maybe I'll go that way. So I think there's something about carrots and sticks, and certainly incentives around that. But even away from social innovation or social entrepreneurship related policies, we've seen, like in the Pacific Islands, where they banned single-use plastics. These kind of policies that are tangentially related to social innovation, it changes the rules of the game for business. So suddenly all businesses are thinking, okay, we need to shift our business model, right? So this is where I think government policy could be so powerful, in terms of kind of, again, both the incentives and actually the mandates and the regulation that they put in place as well. So in short, I think it's quite important now, having first been quite cynical when I was
we appreciate your honesty there in the transition, and I think I would agree there's something hugely valuable for finding people that have worked across sectors had professional experience across these different sectors for generating these ideas. I wanted to touch on the investing side of things. At the Centre for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales, we're doing a lot of research and education on impact investing. This is an area where there has been a lot of domestically, I think, and globally, a lot of hope and perhaps arguably hype around the potential of impact investing, its role in the financial system and in funding solutions to grand challenges as well. Now, it's even in your title of Chief of Innovation, Enterprise and Investment. What's your assessment of the progress of impact investing in the region? Where are we at? What are you seeing?
Oh, I've got to be careful.
Just a small question. Just a small question.
All small questions. I know there are some people on this call from my network who make. I'm very kind of guarded in what. No, I won't be so guarded in what I say. There's a lot of talk around where we're at the tipping point for impact investing. I don't think we're anywhere near it. I'll be honest with you. In terms of the amount of capital we need to unlock to from the UN perspective, finance SDGs, when nowhere near. And you look at some of the COP commitments that have been made, and the capital that needs to be mobilized when nowhere near them. So that's kind of my assessment, not just in Asia Pacific, globally around where we are. I don't think we're there yet. I do think there are huge opportunities and reasons to be optimistic though. So to give an example, we recently supported the establishment of a gender lens investing fund, and one of the key donors to that fund, or the key kind of anchor investors, was actually a mainstream pension fund. And when I met with them, they said to me, well, look, we're just a mainstream pension fund, right? But we're looking to invest for gender equality. And now that was encouraging. That not an impact investor, this is a mainstream financial institution was thinking that way. And this is the shifts. We need more of that. I think in terms of challenges, so I mean, we all know this, impact washing, greenwashing, however we call it. It's a reality. It's a real reality around all of this. So I think there are both kind of opportunities and challenges, but in terms of government policy as well, and going back to that topic, we're seeing some really interesting kind of policy experiments, and the framework I use anyway, and we developed this framework with the Global Steering Group for Impact Investing, GXG, was looking at government role as a market participant, a market regulator, and a market facilitator. So to give you examples of what that would look like, as a market participant, in Australia, you've had outcomes funds or social impact bonds, developed that the governments can participate in the market. In terms of regulation, I mentioned around the tax breaks we have in Thailand here. They can provide that sort of regulation and those sorts of policies. And in terms of being a market facilitator, I mean, as well, in India, they're looking at a social stock exchange, which will link social entrepreneurs, social innovators with impact investors. So we're seeing some really interesting policy experiments. Now let's see how they look in 5-10 years time and evaluate them. But yeah, I think there are reasons to be cheerful, but I don't think we're there yet in terms of the tipping point, at least.
As some of the sticking points, I mean, is it that inherent problem around the impact measurement and getting agreement there? Are you seeing some green shoots in the impact investing space, or some coalescence around certain impact measurement frameworks, or less perhaps not rigor, but determination to quantify things, when it's a
Yeah.
social value than other times? Have we shifted that conversation a little?
I think the holy grail of impact investing is if you can monetize social impact. Now that is so very. Then it would be easier. Companies could say, okay, if I do this, this will help my bottom line this way. Now that was very easy for me just to say. So very difficult to do across, depending on what sort of investor you are, the size of your investments, which sectors you're working, which countries you're working. Very difficult. But that's kind of the holy grail, and we're far from there. We're far from there. But so I think impact measurement is kind of one thing holding it. But I think more broadly, it's what is the purpose of investment? And I'll be honest with you, when I was in venture capital, my bonus is linked to how much money I made. Simple as that. So I wasn't so much thinking about. Obviously, I wasn't investing in tobacco companies at the time. We were investing in clean tech and health tech. So it did have some sort of social impact. But I think that's more holding it back. But again, on being optimistic, I think businesses in the private sector, the people they listen to are their customers, right? And I think we're having more conscious customers now who are looking at the efficacy and the integrity and the social kind of values of the companies they're buying from. And I think that shift is going to be helpful. I think certainly employees and the younger employees are not looking just to work for pure profit anymore. I think the majority are looking for social purpose. So employees will have an impact. And more, obviously, they have to listen to the shareholders. And to give the example of the pension fund, we're seeing kind of some shareholding companies asking for, actually, we're looking for a beyond profit return here. So I think they're some of the issues that I think are kind of holding back the sector. But again, I think there's like nuggets of like optimism, shall we say, that we can take from some of the developments, both anecdotal and more quantitative, around certainly what I'm seeing in the region.
Well, that's really great to hear. We've just got some questions coming through around that issue of blended finance amongst this impact investing space. And given your experience at the Global Innovation Fund, what are some of the lessons learned or advice you have on, pulling together these types of blended finance funds or deals, given your experience?
Yeah, I think that there are 2 points here. I think that the first point is, different types of capital can play different roles. So when I was in DFID, we were UK government, biggest bilateral donor alongside USAID at the time. So we had a lot of money, but maybe our capital was a bit slower. We'd have to get, as you do, you have to get kind of buy-in from the organization, ministerial sign-offs, while like philanthropy could move a lot quicker. Maybe bigger risk appetite, this sort of thing. So certainly I can see the benefits of different forms of capital coming together, because they will have different risk profiles, different levels of scale, different levels of pace. So from that perspective, it made a lot of sense. Now, the most interesting thing for me about the Global Innovation Fund was one of the founding shareholders in the fund was the Omidyar Network. So if you don't know, Pierre Omidyar was the founder of eBay. And it wasn't just the money we were interested in, bringing them into the table. It's because they were in Silicon Valley. Pierre was a venture capitalist. He brought that mindset, a different sort of mindset, coupled with the development organizations such as DFAT we were working with at the time and DFID. So it wasn't so much the blended finance that was very important, obviously, but the blend of different mindsets on how we think about investment. And I think that's often lost in the blended finance conversation. The more human element and the more expertise that these different types of capital bring to the table as well. So I think there's a lot of room for optimism there, and I'd like to see more of that, and particularly kind of blending as well, more national government money, because the more philanthropy, development partners like the UN or bilateral donors can align to national objectives. If the alignment is all there and the objectives are there, we can go very far with blended finance. But again, I'm looking to see what that exemplar model is, because it's still kind of a really kind of a newish topic and a newish area of work.
Terrific. Yeah, I know there's lots of interesting conversations going around that, but I particularly like your idea of different forms of capital being associated with different mindsets that we also need to blend together. I've got just 2 final questions. I'm conscious of the time and you're starting your day as well. One just on, given your role and the organisation that you're in, what are the priorities for you for this year that you're, say, focusing on, or the challenges where you're hoping to see progress or directing your efforts? And a second question, it possibly wouldn't be a conversation or webinar these days without it. What are you seeing on the impact of AI, perhaps, around, say, the impact, the opportunity there, but perhaps the role it might play in impact measurement and data collection and things like that? Any broad insights you might have on that one?
So on kind of where I'm focusing my efforts, I'm trying to grow this movement in Asia Pacific with governments around more broadly, how can we get the private sector thinking about people and planet alongside profit? That's ultimate objective, of what we're trying to do. And the strategies we have taken, I've given lots of national examples of what we've done. Say, we did this in Vietnam, this in Thailand, this the other. We're looking more to work with country groupings because you can get maybe broader impact. So, for example, this year in ASEAN, so the 10 countries of ASEAN, last year we developed their inclusive business strategy, and this year we're developing ASEAN's first ever sustainable investment action plan. These sorts of things and these things are at the highest level. So these things are endorsed by economic ministers of ASEAN. So certainly my focus this year is really around how do we grow a bigger movement, maybe working with country blocks like ASEAN. And I don't know what it would look like in your region, but also raising the bar on ministerial level interest in this, because that's what will give the civil servants, if you like, freedom to operate and freedom to move this agenda forward. I see I have 1 minute, but on AI, 1 minute on AI. I think there's just a couple of points I'll make here. I think certainly it's the hot topic everywhere. Davos, it was the key topic at Davos. I think certainly from my perspective, I would like to see what an Asia-Pacific framework on AI governance would look like, because I think it would look very different from maybe a European and US model. And we've done some research on this. I think certainly within our region, where I tend to work with the poorer countries, I see huge potential. In countries where they don't have doctors and nurses, we can see how AI, very simple AI, can detect whether a mole is cancerous or not. Countries where there are no teachers, AI could have significant development impacts. I think for more developed countries, it's maybe a different story. So maybe in Japan, where the cost of labor is so high. AI does cost money. They may be thinking, well, actually, if I invest in AI, it's probably worth the time and effort and the resources, because it's probably cheaper than hiring 10 people. While maybe, developing countries don't have that same issue where the cost of labor is still so cheap. In terms of thinking back to this agenda, and you mentioned this topic of impact measurement, I do think AI, and I don't know what it looks like yet, has some sort of role to play in impact measurement and being a more independent verification of impact measurement. And that's an interesting area that is yet to be fully tapped into, I think. And certainly this would also address some of the kind of the burden that many social entrepreneurs I speak to say, which is, look, we're a social enterprise, we're asked to do all this impact measurement. It's a lot of work. We're just trying to stay afloat. Why do we have to do all this? And I think that's a real opportunity area. I'll stop there because I'm mindful of the time.
No, look, thank you so much for that. We'd have to have an entire separate webinar, I think, on the evolving conversation of AI. It's very live, very
couple
real.
Of hours, you're going to really.
That's right. We're all grappling with it and thinking through, I think, possible scenarios as well as we play that out. I wanted to thank you very much, Jonathan, for making the time. It's really important for us at the Centre for Social Impact to think about the work that we're doing in the context of the region in particular, given our role. And that's especially part of our focus on that social economy and tapping into those international conversations and having a look at where do we stand domestically and nationally, but also innovation often comes from borrowing ideas from all other places. And so this conversation is really part of that translation and diffusion as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for your hard work, by the way, in contributing to this movement for a more sustainable and inclusive economy as well. We really appreciate it. And thank you for making the time to speak with all of us. I think I'll have to follow up with you towards the end of the year again and have another what's happened in this period of time too.
Very happy to, and thank you again for inviting me, Danielle. This is a passion of mine, so I was delighted to kind of have this conversation with you.